Gun's arrival during the hunt for Big Deal set in motion a chain of events that is starting to end in the workers' destruction. As soon as he made it there, it was clear that they only had one goal, which was to simply survive against him, as that's just how strong Gun was. He was going to end the workers right then and there had Charles not called him back for whatever reason. But what if we replaced Gun with Goo in this scenario? Would Goo be able to make it as far as Gun did? And would he end up fighting James? And if so, who would have won that fight? Before we get into all that, please like and subscribe as it helps the channel. And if you want to interact with me or any other Lookism creator, feel free to join the Generation 3 Discord server. VMAT and Kaiseni made it. They're pretty cool. I'm pretty cool. Tekadon's in it too. So for this alternate story, Jake would have requested one of two guards of Charles Choi, but he would specifically request Goo, as his bloodlust and his urge to kill Gun simply just wouldn't allow him to work with him. Charles will grant the request, and as things started to look up with the arrival of J-High, suddenly a man with an umbrella and suit could be seen slowly approaching. That man would obviously be Goo. He'd tell the workers that it's basically over for him and he came to seal the deal. And in that instance, I believe that the executives would jump on Goo in a similar fashion to what they did with Gun. I think this would be an interesting fight, with Goo probably getting beat up within the first few instances as he usually does, though with little to no effect. He was able to easily tank the attacks of an Ant Basement Hulk who has the physical strength of Tom Lee. In fact, it was stated that he is on Tom Lee's level in every aspect besides intelligence, and Goo was simply walking through his attacks with really no sign of fatigue or being hurt at all, so he should be able to get through these attacks with no problem. He'd probably joke around a bit as it's in character for him to do so, but then I think he'd pick up a certain someone's weapon. You see, Eli Zhang in the fight was fighting Gun with his baton, and I don't think that would change here. In fact, I see Goo likely grabbing this baton from him and starting to use it against him and changing the ties of the fight. Again, he was able to dispatch Tom tier opponents with simply a hammer. Not to mention, he wasn't using this hammer as a sword until later on in the fight, and he was still overwhelming them. This is just showing that he can handle himself very well without a sword, and he can still fight on par with top tier opponents without a sword. He'd likely take out the executives as well, as Kenta doesn't really stand a chance. He's likely still weaker than Jason Yoon after all. While Eli and Warren on the other hand could put up somewhat of a decent fight, but even in their current forms, they get dealt with pretty easily. Goo is simply too dangerous for either of them, being faster and stronger. We know this as we've seen Goo fight hand to hand with brute strength characters such as Jinjiao, literally just going blow for blow with him without even using a weapon. Not to mention, he was able to damage Basement Hulk with simple punches and knees, and he's been implied to be on the same level physically as Gun and Daniel. Mondiak and Yusung arguably have the best chance simply due to Yusung being there. However, I won't dive into that at this moment because I have a separate video planned going over Yusung. You see, things would start to look grim on the battlefield, at least for workers, until Ryuhei Kuroda would arrive. He was the second to last resort in Eugene's eyes, and they'd agree that if Ryuhei loses, workers is pretty much cooked. I see Goo taking this fight with a fair amount of ease, as he could easily use a weapon in the battlefield such as Eli's baton to even the playing field, seeing as now he has something to easily match Commando. And being honest, this fight could go similar to the gunfight where Ryuhei gets some good looks in, but we know that Gun was trying to simply experience how strong Ryuhei was rather than end the fight right then and there. And we know Goo isn't his typical joking self with a sword, so maybe he'd finish it even quicker. Plus, he mentions that he's not like Gun. He doesn't enjoy fighting. He doesn't like to see fighters blossom into something else. He wants to end them quickly and cut the root before the flower is able to grow. So with that being said, I think he should be able to take the cake easily with this fight. Ryuhei hasn't shown the attack potency to even damage Gun, and we know Goo is able to damage Gun. Realistically, after this fight, Goo wouldn't really pay much respect, but instead I see him taking Commando for himself as he prepared to end things with Eugene. But in that moment, sunlight would beam through the dark clouds as a man would be seen walking through the rays. James Lee himself has officially arrived on the battlefield. The two would exchange short words, and Goo would question if Charles knew what he was actually doing, but James would simply disregard that, and the two would face off as they prepared to fight.